Alright, hey, what's good, fellas? Joska's in the chat. Well, not really, because there is no chat. It's just a video. As per schedule, I posted 2 podcasts. Yeah, I did, right? And then a lot of blogs in between. And today's Monday, and because I just posted 2 podcasts, that means that it is time for our book analysis. Yes, they are the most time-consuming uh, mm, episode types, I guess, category of videos. So, anyways, if you're unfamiliar with how these work, well, basically think of a book review, right? So I've done a few book reviews on my channels before, and well, I just take the book and I review them. I do a brief summary, and then it's like, hey, this book's pretty good because X, Y, and Z, or this book's pretty bad because A, B, C. Book analysis are a bit different. Instead of talking about the quality of the story, what I do is I talk about, like, I extract a few key ideas from the book. So you could look through my channel and you'll find a Brave New World one. That was my first book analysis, and that one I just talked about the definitions of a dystopia and how it differs from based on the context. And then the more recent one was No Country for Old Men, where it's like talking about the story as an existential film more slash story. This one's on Crime and Punishment, so that's the deal here. I'm gonna do a book analysis on Crime and Punishment, except the key change here is, instead of talking about one idea from the book, as I've done with Brave New World and No Country for Old Men, I am talking about not one, not two, not three, but 4 key ideas. And then I'm going to conclude it all, basically. So, Crime and Punishment. It's a book by, just to introduce the fellow here, it's a book by this gentleman who became this gentleman, and his name was Fyodor Dostoevsky, one of the most brilliant writers to, come out of Russia, if not the world. He wrote quite a few well-known books in classical literature, such as Brothers Kamarov, Notes from the Underground, and then I've yet to read Brothers, but I have read Notes, and then short stories such as Dream of a Ridiculous Man and White Knights, yes. But, Jesus. See, I still don't know how to edit out scenes and noises, so the garage just opened, and it is too late in the night for me to give a damn about it and restart the video, so you're just gonna have to bear that. It's probably gonna close again, so you'll hear that again, so forgive me. In any case, the most famous story that he wrote was Crime and Punishment, which is the subject of the story, subject of this video here. So, thanks to Wikipedia, I managed to copy and paste a brief synopsis of the story for the uninitiated here. So it's about this guy named Rashkolnikov. I'll refer to him as Rashko from now on. Rashko. So Rashko is like this. A lot of his stories are based in Russia, and most of them are based in St. Petersburg for some reason. So yeah, Rashko's an ex-student in St. Petersburg. He's basically a NEET. So we call them hikikomoris here, but NEET basically stands for not in education, employment, or trade. And he's like, all right, well, I'm a pretty brilliant guy. I'm pretty smart, so I'm gonna kill a pawnbroker and take her money because I can I can actually put it to some use, right? Pawnbroker doesn't need the money when I'm much more brilliant. I could use the money for better things because I'm a better person. And then, it literally just states right here. Believes the money that he could liberate us from poverty and perform great deeds. Yes. So he commits the deed literally within like the first, not even the first half, but like the first half of the first half. So like within the first quarter of the story, Yeah, and he's like, oh my god, what have I done? See, he totally wasn't prepared for this. Um, he he saw that he could probably get away with it, and he does, except the one person that he can escape from is his own conscience, and he struggles with guilt and horror, as it says here, and he confronts the real world consequences of his deed. If you want to know more about the story itself, just search up Crime and Punishment Wikipedia. All right, so now you may be wondering why 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Four of these phrases are bolded in red and underlined, with the exception of this red. Well, that's just because it's detected as a typo. But these 4 ones are red, and that is because these will be the 4 ideas that I will talk about and analyze in this video. So basically, these 4 ideas, they are going to be the bulk of the story here. So because with Crime and Punishment, right, it's a very compact book. It's a very multi-dimensional, I guess, right? And you could like see it from many perspectives, and you could like extract so many good ideas. So I just decided to extract the top 4, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see it here. So let me just overview them one by one. I summarize it 2 for 2, 2 on each slide here, and then I'm just gonna expand on them. One idea gets a whole slide, then I'm gonna conclude and ask you to subscribe. So let's go over the ideas, right? So the first thing that struck out was his justification for killing the pawnbroker, and he justified it as well, he's gonna perform great deeds, and the pawnbroker isn't, because she's old and she's described as pretty mean, and she probably wouldn't put the money to much use. So that's his justification, right? So there's a very utilitarian perspective to it. In other words, as it says here, he sees himself as the rightful inheritor of the money because he reasons that he is much more worthy in society. But the idea here is, who gets to define worth, right? And based on what standards? So basically, in other words, Rashko was like, yeah, dude, I deserve the money. But the question that really came up in my mind as I was reading it is like, okay, but like, based on what criteria do you make that statement? Because it is obvious that the criteria that you used is performing the great deeds, right? If you read the book, you'll see that he compares himself to Napoleon, and like he could like really go places with just really go places if only he wasn't impoverished. And so by taking the money, he decides to go places. But my question is, okay, well, is it objectively the case that just because you can go, even if he could have gone places, is it objectively the case that makes you the rightful inheritor of the money? So that's the first idea. Then the second idea is that I got is from the part where his justifications disintegrate completely, and this really led me to the ideas on basically the dichotomy versus theory versus practice. So you could tell that there was a huge discrepancy between he himself in the before the murder and himself after the murder. So just to expand on that, all seemed relatively good until the rubber hits the road, right? So he was poor. He didn't have a lot going for his life, but he was nowhere in this, and he was sort of insane, but not nearly as much as after the murder. He didn't start fainting out of nowhere. He didn't start panicking out of a sudden. He didn't have a persecution complex before the murder took place. So all does seem good until the rubber hits the road, until it actually happens, until the series implemented and put into practice. And so the idea that I have is that, or the idea that I extracted from this is, all right, well, I guess what the moral of this story here, or one of the morals from this perspective here, is that if you have a series, right, if you have an idea that you want to implement, you really got to make sure that your series are in tune with reality, because series often fail to consider factors and unintended consequences. So those are half the ideas right there. Now, the other two ideas that I want to talk about is the fact that after the murder, he struggles with guilt and horror. So, he tried to play God and then suffered, and then this suffering was alleviated at the end when he prayed to God. And key idea is that one can extract his responsibility transfer, and so responsibility transfer is when you just conceptualize someone else as having the responsibility for what you did, and then that like alleviates the stress that you have on yourself. So that's one idea that you can extract. But the other idea here is what I find interesting is the missed potential to grow from this. There's a real the two most authors that I'm reading at the moment is Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, and because how do you say, considering all the criticism Nietzsche had for Christianity, he seems to be a real fan of Dostoevsky. Well, see, it's weird because, Dostoevsky talked in a lot of his books and stories. He always had a theme about he always had this theme about submitting to God and leaving your utopian dreams at the hands of a higher power and just submitting to that. And then on the other hand, this is an oversimplification, by the way. And then on the other hand, Nietzsche have over advocated to really harness the guilt and the shame and the suffering that you have, and then kind of like use its power and like grow from it. So that dichotomy there is very interesting, and I wonder, hey, maybe wait a minute. See, we saw that Rashko really got broken down mentally, right, with his own guilt, and he alleviated that by praying. But like, couldn't it have been the case that he could have possibly grown from it by really embracing what he did, and then fully accepting his actions and the consequences that it had? And had he done that, if he really bared that burden, could he have risen even stronger? That's an answer that I do not know, because in the story does not end that way. It ends with him submitting to God. So we'll never know. But I'll leave that for later when I expand on it in these subsequent slides over here. Now, the last idea here is the real world consequences. See, a lot of the times we fail to acknowledge the fact that our how to say that when we try to implement our ideas, there's gonna have a little pushback, there's gonna have a little side effects, etc. I kind of expanded on that in the series versus practice explanation here. But the idea that I want to take here in this last idea is that when you cross certain lines, you are whether you know it or not making a gamble, and in this gamble is the real world consequences. So taking Rashko for example, he decided to take action and then kill the pawnbroker, and he could have liberated himself, right? It's a possibility. He could have taken the money and be like, heck yeah, now I can be the next Napoleon, right? That could have happened. Oopsies. But then the other possibility was he could have completely broken down and gone insane, which was the actual result. And so I think the idea here is that there are two things to keep in mind when you have certain lines. One is when you cross them, you're making a gamble between breaking down or becoming free, and the other is when you don't take that gamble, when you don't cross it. When you don't cross it, then you remain bitter and resentful, and I think this is where we feel the most regret, is when we didn't take that gamble and we have that well, what if I did, right? What if I did take that leap of faith and then like it turns out that I could have made something out of it. So yeah, those are the 4 ideas, right? The gamble. Oh yeah, Dostoevsky had a gambling addiction, by the way. The gamble, right? And then the that could he have harnessed the guilt and horror, and you gotta, the serious practice, you gotta make sure that your series are in tune with reality, and who gets to define worse and based on what standards. So let's go with that one first, yeah. So I already explained in brief detail why this question is something that I find important, because we always talk about virtues, and I explained this in the last podcast I did on my own, where I talked about how we always designate certain actions and deeds as virtues, and that justifies our actions. So it's like, hey, why did you why did you hold the door for that person? Well, the justification usually is that it's considered a virtue, and then that justifies the fact that you held the door. But it's really interesting, and like I said, I mentioned this in that podcast. But really, virtues and its counterpart, vices, are only so because of the circumstances. You'll notice a lot of the morality, the moral codes that different societies have. They just happen they happen to be the morals that kind of keep the society together. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that say in some places where, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example here, like in some cases it's people are driven by guilt, in some places it's driven by shame, and I think that kind of axiom determines what's a virtue and what's a vice. And so if the circumstance change in that the people who are driven by guilt as opposed to shame, right? If the circumstance changes in that the people motivated by guilt are now motivated by shame, then certain virtues are going to be overturned, and they are going to be vices, and well, vice versa. And so what makes Rashko any better than a pawnbroker then, right? Because he justified it as being that he could put the money to better use and really go places with the money. But really, who gets to decide that going places with the money is any better than being a very mean pawnbroker? I guess I explained it best in the video "Who Gets to Define Dystopia," right? So taking that Brave New World story for example, you had all these characteristics of the Brave New World, and the reader reads it and says, "Wow, that's Brave New World, man! It's pretty dystopian." But you have to understand that the only reason you think it's dystopian is because you don't live in that world, and that you live in a different world, which is this world, and so because there is a discrepancy, and you don't want to be in the world that you read in the story, you think that it's a dystopia. And so I guess extrapolating that example, I could have been raised in a brave new world that said that being a pawnbroker is better than being neat, and so um, uh, maybe from that standpoint, it was justified for the pawnbroker to kill Rashko, right? So really, who gets to define worse and based on what standards? That really puzzles me even to this day, and I think the only way to answer it is it's almost of a cop out, but it's that you can't really answer it, um, because of the uh, subject because of its nature, the fact that it's so subjective and that it's so dependent on circumstances and it's relative and all that. So the only possible answer that I could think of right now is the idiom might makes right, which by the way does not mean that who is mighty is right. It just means that what is that might is a good substitute for what's right. So a good way to explain this with using the stories as a example is, well, it may not have been right for Rashko to kill the pawnbroker, but the fact that he did it and the fact that the pawnbroker can't say anything now, it kind of makes it as Rashko might as well been right, because might makes right, and he had the upper hand, and the pawnbroker is now defeated. So even if the pawnbroker wanted to protest to that, well, what's the pawnbroker gonna do? She's dead. So might makes right. Just to clarify once again, it doesn't mean that because X is more mighty than Y, therefore X is right. It just means that because X can have the upper hand, the moment that X really makes that a reality, the moment that Y is defeated so much to a degree that they can no longer find their way above X on the hierarchy, then X might as well be right, whether or not he really is right. And so that, I guess, that is the only standard that can explain this whole question of who gets to define what are virtues and who gets to define what are vices. That is all that is the best I can do at the moment. But if I ever change my mind on that, I will definitely make a note of it and maybe put it in a future video. So that would be all for the first idea, right? And then the second idea I had is, as I said, the discrepancy behind having a series, and then there's the other there's the second time the garage is closing. Again, like I said, I'm too lazy to edit it out. It's too late in the night. And it might makes right, and you can't do anything about it. I mean, I guess you can be so turned off by the sound that you close this video right now, and I wouldn't be able to do anything. But I mean, whatever, dude. I don't really care. Anyways, so the second idea is that series, they often fail to consider factors and unintended consequences, and that's because results, they speak for themselves. But and that's obvious, right? But what I wanted to really focus on was the nature of the series, and that is most interesting. If you recall, Rashko had a very philosophical stance on life, and he tried to implement, or at least live by. And now, kudos to him, by the way, for having integrity. But let me just expand on that philosophical stance there. The whole I have better things to do with the money, therefore I deserve it mentality. And it seems, and this is very anecdotal, but it always seems to me in life that the materially dispossessed. I'm linguistically dispossessed. The materially dispossessed always seems to be striving towards abstract ideals. In other words, ideals that are not found in physical stuff. Now you could be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, money is very materialistic. In fact, it is the poster boy for materialism. Well, wait a minute, because taking the money wasn't the crux of Rashko's philosophy. If you really have to understand that Rashko's philosophy was he could take the money because he is worth more than the pawnbroker. The fact that he is worth more than society and can be the next Napoleon was the main idea, and that was just manifested through taking the money. He could have taken anything else really, and it didn't. He could have taken something unmaterial for all I care. What he really tried to do was to just prove to himself that he had the um, he was worth more in society. Oof, I cannot speak today. And you have to admit that's a very abstract ideal. And I think it's very interesting that it is people who have nothing, like who are very lacking in material gains. They always strive to something beyond material, and I think, as it says, they are, without knowing it, trying to strive to a headspace beyond this world. In other words, they want to go beyond the world that they are currently suffering in. So it's almost like an appeal to the afterlife. Like, life here in this materialistic world is pretty bad. I want to go to the abstract place where I'm Napoleon, kind of deal. And I think it's interesting because he could have just as easily gotten a job and made money, which would have made him more maturity. He would have possessed more material gains, and then it's very possible that he would no longer have the desire to go for the abstract. Something to think about. Now, at the same time, you could do a full 180 on this and say, wait a minute, if I want to be imaginative, or if I'm writing a story and I want to be creative here with ideas, what if I lived a very simple life and rid myself of material gains? Would I be more creative? I don't know. But it's something to think about, and maybe I could do that too in the future. I don't know. Seems like a fun experiment. But anyways, the third idea I wanted to extract from this, and analyzing the book, this is the most interesting one. It's, as I said, it is the possibility that he could have potentially outgrown that guilt and harnessed his power instead of submitting like he did in the story. And I laid out four stages, and that's in a possible fifth, and I'll explain that later. But the gist of this idea goes that, well, see, Rashko had certain morals, and then he decided to reject them, and for a more utilitarian approach. But something tells me that he tried to reject them out of a place of escapism, out of cowardice. I think a lot of people, when they reject morality, they rationalize it as saying, well, it's not objective. And I think that's true. I think morality is pretty subjective. You can't really say that, it's objectively bad to do X, it's objectively good to do Y. Even if everyone thinks that way, you can't still say it's objective. You could say, a clock is a clock, a water bottle is a water bottle, but you can't really say a water bottle is, it's good to drink plenty of water a day. You could say, well, of course it's objectively good to drink water, you'll die. Well, you can't really say the objectively bad to die, right? So there is a very reasonable approach to this, but I can't help the feeling, and maybe I'm projecting here, but what if we're just rejecting them out of cowardice and escapism, so that we don't have to bear any responsibility for our actions? And this theory might seem pretty absurd, but if you look at Rashko, it fits him perfectly, right? It seems to be the case that the the thing that really crushed him was the fact that he realized that he was responsible for these actions, and that's what made him feel guilt. And that is the idea that is expressed in Das Buch Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche on the Pale Criminal, where he does a deed and he feels shame for it, so he deems himself as a sinner, a bad guy, whatever. And I think that's where Rashko ended up. He ended up as the Pale Criminal, and then he, of course, as you recall, he got out of this by submitting to a higher power, and then that made him relatively sane. But again, like I said, is it not possible that he could have outgrown that guilt and live without guilt or regret? Like, could he have embraced it? Could he have realized, well, just as, it's really not, like, could he have, I don't know, understood that the reasons that he used to kill the pawnbroker is the same reasons that he could use to kill the person inside of him that was guilty? Like a symbolic murder of his own conscience. And if he did that, could he not have outgrown it? Isn't a possible fifth stage that I've added was, well, what if he felt the need to not outgrow anything and become at peace with any guilt or regret that is still lies within him, and that he could? Would it not be better if he felt no need to overcome anything? And this is a idea that me and my friends are having right now. Is that if you recall in the No Country for Old Men video, I talked about how a lot of people make the mistake of when they try to live, in their actions they make the mistake of trying to defeat death, but you kind of have to accept that it's an unwinnable war. And then, so on the one hand, you could make that fight for the sake of the fight, which is what I advocated for in the video, and kind of outgrow it. But me and my friends are kind of wondering, okay, well, instead of fighting, is it possible that you could instead use that energy, effort to invest in embracing the fact that you feel very bad and feel very evil for killing a pawnbroker? And if you could do that, then, well, would it not follow that the guilt and shame that you feel, wouldn't it be the case that they would no longer have any power over you? In that, by doing so, you would liberate yourself, just as Rashko found liberation. Again, that one, we are gonna do a video on it. Me and my friend, it's gonna be a follow up to the No Country for Old Men video, so keep your heads up for that. Now, the last idea that I wanted to talk about here is, well, the breakdown of liberation versus bitter and resentful. So if you recall, I pointed out that when you try to cross lines, there are always you always ended up being in a worse place or a better place. And if you don't cross them, if you don't try, it's very possible that you end up better and resentful. So I guess at the end, what I'm trying to communicate here is that there's a price to be paid when lines that we hold dear are crossed. But at the same time, when lines that we dislike are kept, we feel bitter and resentful. And when we are in a comfortable state, just as Rashkolnikov was, right, in his impoverished little neat lifestyle, hikikomori lifestyle, obviously it's understandable that he tries to break down the barriers that obstructed him. But I think this knee-jerk reaction is so obvious that we don't think of why we try to overcome the obstacles that stands in front of us. And I think it's almost like we are trying to relieve our sense of the self being inadequate. And I don't know the actual validity of this theory, but I am going to play along with this one because it is interesting. So it's almost as if the impoverished Rashko was trying to prove himself that he can assert himself into the arena of life in an idealistic way. And just to kind of explain what that means, well, see, it's very interesting how Rashkolnikov was trying to live up to the image of Napoleon when he himself was very almost embarrassed of his own financial state. So it's almost like a overcompensating scenario here, right? And this is almost half the story of Notes from the Underground, where the poor nameless protagonist of that story, he was very ashamed of his financial state, and then he kept denying that, right? He was in self-denial, and he tried to overcompensate it by, ridiculing the more affluent companions that he had around him, saying that, oh, they were not as smart as him, they weren't deep thinkers, they were too superficial, that kind of thing. And I think that's one way in which Rashko could have dealt with his own sense of inferiority that he had over his financial state. But the other one, and the one that he took in the story, was that he just tried to say, well, no, what do you mean I'm inferior because of my status in society? Here, watch me, I'm gonna kill this pawnbroker and I'm going to rise to the top of society. And so it's very interesting because the implications of this idea can go very far here. Especially in these days, we always hear people complaining about the state of society, right? It's going down. It's 2020 is a bad year, man. But the people that I want to talk about the most are the ideologically driven ones, the ones who say, oh, if we have X implemented, all will be fine. We just need to make sure that the people of Group X are, they have the people from Group Jesus, I'm talking like Joe Biden. People from Group X can be like Y, and then people from Group Z are abolished, and then people from Group A, B, C are doing this way, and then we can have the support of Group whatever, and they have these intricate ideas on how they can solve the world's problems, but it almost seems like by doing so they're just trying to externalize their own internal discontents with life. Now that's some psychological how do you say? That's a very psychologically based idea, and I'm not a psychologist, so I wouldn't know. It's very suspicious to me. That Rashkolnikov's solution that he had, it's just so convenient that it kind of contrasts perfectly well with his own state of life, right? Whether or not he knew, he self-diagnosed himself as being low in society, so he kind of tried to go to the top of society. It's something to think about, I think, especially with the nature of today's where the people of today's headspace are at. Now, I have been rambling on a bit, and I'm sure you've noticed by now, but I don't have a PowerPoint with a lot of pictures. I've stumbled on my words a lot, and that is because Well, two reasons mainly. Well, one reason, and then I try to build another reason off of it. So I guess a reason and a bastardized reason. The reason was that I procrastinated. I was supposed to do the script and the PowerPoint and all that yesterday, and my job today was just read it off today. But I didn't have time for that because I left everything to the last minute like I always do, and that is why I just rambled on. So what I would do to make up for this very low production video is that in the description box I will point out I'll extract the key ideas from a book analysis video in which extracts a key idea from the book and put it in the description boxes and kind of bullet form explain to them in details. But the general gist of it is from the book we see Rashko have a justification to do X, and then that justification was not rooted in reality, right? So this justification, first of all, it raises questions like, okay, well, how is it justified? And then I kind of came to the conclusion that, well, for lack of a better justification, might makes right. And now his justification that he was going to be Napoleon wasn't really rooted in reality, and so he went insane and broke down. But then we asked, okay, well, buddy, could he have risen from the ashes? And then we ended up on a note asking, well, why do all this? And then I kind of theorized that, well, maybe he's just trying to externalize his internal problems. So that's the main TLDR version of it. I'll put that in the description later. Yeah, that's it for the video. I don't know how long it took. I wasn't keeping time. But please subscribe. Here's my Insta and here is my blog. Just copy and paste that, or I guess, right? Yeah, I'll put it in the description box. I always do. But like I said in the last video, you could just go on my about page. Yeah, peace out. I hate this video just as much as you do. Bye.